Alright, we will be in Acts chapter 7, verses 1 through 8 today. We'll go ahead and start reading that. And the high priest said, "Are these things so?" And Stephen said, "Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, 'Go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land that I will show you.'" Verse 4, "Then he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran, and after his father died, God removed him from there into this land in which you are now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give it to him as a possession to his offsprings after him, though he had no child. And God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be sojourners in a land belonging to others, who would enslave themselves and afflict them for 400 years. Verse 7, "But I will judge the nation that they serve, said God, and after that they shall come out and worship me in this place." And he gave him the covenant of circumcision, and so Abraham became the father of Isaac, circumcised him on the 8th day, and Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. So this begins the longest sermon in the book of Acts by a man, Stephen. We looked at him last week. This man was full of power and the Holy Spirit. And he was a deacon, and God was using this man in huge ways, full of grace and power. And this would be the one sermon this man got to preach. It's important to remember, though, that God had been preparing this man. This was his plan all along. He knew that Stephen would be killed after this. So God makes the most of it and uses this man in a huge way. And basically what Stephen's going to do is he's going to begin, this verse begins a history lesson. So we see in verse 1 it says, "And the high priest said, 'Are these things so?'" Talking about what people were accusing, and there's false accusations being thrown around saying Stephen was blaspheming Moses and God. And we left off, and Stephen's face was glowing like Moses. So we saw that funny little section. But we understand now that Stephen is going to, instead of defending himself, he's going to respond with grace, and he's going to end up giving a full-on sermon to these people, which is just truly amazing. Human nature is often that we make excuses for things, or we try to play the victim, or we just try to get out of something. Even if we didn't do it necessarily, we still will try to, bail ourselves out. And it's really cool to see, because Stephen, instead of doing that, will give a sermon instead of saying, "Well, I didn't say those things. Those things are lies." He doesn't go there at all. But yeah, this way of Stephen doing it is the Spirit-filled Christian way. We see the same thing with Jesus in Matthew chapter 26, verse 63. It says that he remained silent after the false witnesses came to the stand. That's what Jesus did. He remained silent after the false witnesses. And Stephen, given a chance to defend himself here, instead of defending himself, he goes into a full-on sermon about things that the history of the world, really. He goes, "Brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham." So he brings up Abraham, and that is truly what better place can he start? He says, "Abraham, our father," because Stephen's a Jew. He's a Greek-speaking Jew, a Hellenist, and these Jews, that's who they know. That's who they believe. They don't believe in Jesus, but they do believe in Abraham. And they believe in the patriarchs, because they believe in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. After that, a lot of them don't believe in that. Especially back then, these would be the Sadducees, which were the liberal party. So they didn't believe in basically the entire Bible besides the first 5 books. It's also worth noting that Abraham didn't go seeking God. This Mesopotamia was known for their idol worship. That is what everyone had, their own idols. This was what this land was known for, and it's logical to believe that Abraham was part of that and lived with idol worship and stuff. And so it's really cool to see that God appeared to Abraham. Abraham didn't go seeking out God. There was no, it was all grace. God went to Abraham. God didn't have to choose Abraham. God could have chosen any person. Maybe someone who would objectively be more equipped, so to speak. Maybe someone who I don't know. There's people who he could have chosen besides Abraham, but he chooses this man, Abraham. And he says, I'm going to make a nation out of you. Anyway, yeah, this man, Abraham, maybe as far from perfect as he was a father of faith, as Hebrews will call him. So God goes to Abraham and he tells him, go out from this land and from your kindred and go into the land that I will show you. God is removing him from the problems, from these idols. He's saying, we're going to get you away from these. And he'll be a sojourner. He'll be someone who never really settles down. he'll be in the promised land tenthing, but he won't own any of it besides the grave. He buys a plot of land where he buries Sarah, like a cave. Other than that, he won't own a foot length, as it says in verse 5. After Terah dies, his father, he'll move out of there, and he'll go towards the promised land. He'll take Lot with him, of course, and we'll see a lot of issues aroused because of that. Lot ended up being kind of this picture of a worldly guy following Abraham around, causing all sorts of issues, like we saw with Sodom and Gomorrah. He decided he was going to stay in his Egypt, and we saw all the problems that came from there, with Abraham saying, God, spare them if there's 10 good people, 50 good people, 10 good people, 5 good people, 1 good person. Would you spare them? But there's none. God wiped them out because of it. And we see just a couple different things with Lot creating some stumbling for Abraham. So he takes Lot with him, and Abraham journeys to the promised land, and he gets none of it. But God promises it for his offspring after him, and he had no child. This is before he had Isaac. We'll see Abraham have a son with Hagar, Ishmael, and the Ishmaelites will be a problem to the Israelites for a long time. Again, this was not the way God wanted to do things. He wanted Abraham to wait, and he would bless him with a son, his own Isaac. And we see that, and then we see God test Abraham and say, bring Isaac, your son, who's going to be your inheritance. He's going to own this land, or his offspring will, and you're going to sacrifice him. Abraham goes up to the mountain, ready to sacrifice him, ready, willing, and he's going to, out of a huge act of faith, knowing that God's got him, and God provides a ram for his son. And instead of Abraham killing Lot, he'll kill the ram instead, which is again a perfect picture of a perfect sacrifice, Jesus Christ, who would end up changing the whole world through what he did, and now we live because of what he did. But that was a great picture of a sacrifice needing to bring freedom. And in this case, it was freedom for Isaac. And then we'll see this man Isaac. We'll see him give birth to Jacob and Esau. Jacob, of course, meaning heel grabber, and we'll see Jacob swindle his brother one time over beef stew for his birthright, and the second time he'll put sheepskin on his arms, and his mom will cook. Rebecca will cook a stew and bring it to Isaac, and he will get his brother's blessing. And in fear of his life, we'll see Jacob flee to Haran with his uncle, Laban. And he would serve 7 years to have the hand of marriage of Rachel, but Laban will swindle a swindler by giving him Leah. So then he has to serve another 7 years to get Rachel. And then Rachel, we'll see, will bear him his two favorite sons, Benjamin and Joseph. And we'll look in depth at Joseph next week. And we'll see Jacob go back, richer than he went to his uncle's house in Haran, back to his parents' house, and he'll meet up with Esau, even though he was afraid for his life. Esau will welcome him back, big hug, embrace him. And anyway, we see that these men that God wrote about, these three men, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the patriarchs, how broken even they were. They were far from perfect, and God makes sure He shows us that. He shows us that even the men He formed Israel, the nation, with, and the men that He used in huge ways, they were still far from perfect. And it's just truly awesome that God shows us that we don't have to be perfect, because these men weren't. We can't be perfect. It's truly not in our nature. But I think it is important to remember that God searched out us, and He wants to use us. He chose us for the time we're in. We're only in this time because He chose us. It's also important to remember that we look at this man Stephen and his testimony. He is accused, wrongfully accused. It's important to remember that we don't have to defend ourselves. God will defend us. We just have to walk in faith with Him. Look what Stephen's doing. He goes into a sermon. He's going to save, I don't know how many lives because of this sermon. A lot, though. We'll see Paul himself, Saul of Tarsus, who ended up stoning Stephen, was profoundly impacted by Stephen's sermon. And God used Stephen's sermon in Paul and through Paul. It's important to remember that sometimes we don't have to stand up for ourselves. God's got us. We can just take steps of faith. And then it's also important, I think, to remember that we are in this constant path of sanctification, this constant process. It is hard but rewarding. God won't give us more than we can handle. He will only give us what we can handle, and He will be there so we can handle it. So we just need to continue praying that for help with that sanctification process, for strength, for boldness, for wisdom. God's going to just use each and every one of us if we let Him, and He is there all the time for us. It's important to remember that prayer is powerful. Also, just to wrap up this Stephen's part 1, it also says in verse 6, and God spoke to this effect, that His offspring would be sojourners in a land belonging to others who would enslave them and afflict them for 400 years, but I will judge the nation that they serve, and they will come out and worship me in this place. And He gave them the covenant of circumcision, and so Abraham became the father of Isaac, and circumcised him on the 8th day, and Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. So we see God predicts they will be sojourners in a land. They will be slaves in a land for 400 years. That would be Egypt, of course. God will raise up a man, Moses, to save them. But they will have to suffer a little bit. And it says we will return them here. And here is, of course, the promised land that Abraham is in currently. That Abraham won't own anything in besides a cave, but his offspring. And these are the offerings he's talking about. Is they will have the promised land. And it talks about circumcision. This was the covenant He made with Abraham. The sign for the covenant was circumcision. It was on the 8th day, because that's when vitamin K, which is what stops bleeding, forms. So God very much knew what He was doing by saying the 8th day. And then we see that Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs, and that's where we will pick up next week. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.